Welcome to another episode of the Distributed Data Show, brought to you by DataStax Academy, where we bring you the latest news and interview technical experts to help you succeed in building large-scale distributed systems.
Hello, I'm Adron. You probably know me by now. This is Luc, our guest today. He is in the process of giving a talk tonight, but we caught him right before to talk about some things related largely to what you're doing these days, which is
I am currently a developer advocate at the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. In case you're not familiar with it, it's an open source foundation, nonprofit or open source foundation with funding from a lot of big and small tech companies out there, and
they work on a project that's kind of popular called.
They work on a couple projects. You're probably pointing me in the direction of Kubernetes, which I think we could call our flagship project. But yeah, it's essentially an open source foundation like the Apache Foundation, but with a heavy focus in containers and what we're calling the cloud native paradigm.
Cool, very cool. And tonight you're actually going to be talking specifically about Prometheus, which is, besides Kubernetes, the other graduated project, right? Yeah,
so right now we have a number of projects that are applying for graduation from the CNCF, but Prometheus is the second to graduate after Kubernetes. I believe it was in August that Prometheus kind of got over the hump.
So just short period of time, really.
Yeah.
That's cool. So with that, what have you been working on lately that's really kind of intrigued you, that you've found interesting, that you've really wanted to get into more, that you've been working with? Well,
Adron, or
yes,
as I call him, the Large Adron Collider.
Oh dear.
I've called him this for years. We go way back to the Portland tech scene. Anyways, so Adron, you know as well as anybody that a position like developer advocate is a very kind of nebulous thing, where you end up doing all kinds of things.
Even.
Yeah, it's quite cloudy. And you end up doing any number of things. You end up putting meetups together. You end up giving presentations. You end up writing blog posts and tweeting and pounding the pavement and
heaven
everything
forbid,
in between.
Contributing code.
Or heaven forbid, contributed code.
A lot of that.
Which I don't do a lot of that. So in my case, as a developer advocate for the CNCF, because it's an open source foundation, I'm there to serve the projects.
Right.
So whatever the project maintainers need from us as an organization, we try to give. So and that can mean a lot of things. As an organization, we plan conferences, we plan meetups, we provide graphic design work, we do all kinds of things. Thus far, I've been trying to fill a gap that actually most projects identify as as their biggest pain point and their biggest need, which is docs. So tonight, for example, I'm here in town up in Seattle to do a meetup presentation, and I plan on doing plenty of that. But actually, it turns out that in our internal survey that we do every year amongst our 15 to 20 odd projects, documentation to website help is identified as the number one
I can see that
thing.
I think that's even the same in like Apache and a lot of the whatever the node one is in and all that. It's always docs. There's always docs to be written.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So thus far, I'm sure that my role will change a lot over time as we get more help in the CNCF and as the projects potentially change ownership. Blah blah blah. A lot can happen, but yeah. So in my 4 months at the CNCF thus far, it's been a lot of docs. Been working on Kubernetes docs, Prometheus docs, Containerd, Jaeger tracing, all kinds of stuff. You name it.
Yeah, interesting. So it's kind of a random question here. What container tech are you using mostly right now?
Container tech am I using mostly right now?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good question. When you as a person who's mostly just been writing docs and working on websites.
Yeah, but I know you're building stuff.
Yeah. No, I'm always playing around with stuff behind the scenes. I would say, there's a few things that I am finding pretty interesting in the both within the CNCF umbrella and outside of it. I would say that probably the most interesting thing to me right now is outside of the CNCF umbrella. So,
really?
So some people at Google are working on a tool called Skaffold. That's Skaffold with a K.
Oh, okay.
And this is a really interesting tool that I've complained a lot in the past that as much as I love Kubernetes and find it really compelling as an operational story and as a platform, that the developer's story is still very lacking. That's
a tough one.
Yeah, it's a tough one. That you just that Kubernetes is great if you have an entire team of people who are making it great for you and turning it effectively into a PaaS.
Kind of a running theme at the last KubeCon.
Yeah,
was a lot of people were driving home the point that we need to get to the point with Kubernetes where the developers aren't writing kubectl or kubectl or whatever, kubecontrol, whatever your variance is that you type. We don't need the developers to have to fiddle with that. That needs to be done, and the developers need to have their packaged application or business deployment ready to just ship out the door and be able to do that. They don't need to be messing with all that other stuff. And that was like everybody from Brendan Burns to Kelsey Hightower, they were all talking about that. So I can imagine that hopefully the developer story is getting more streamlined and will get more smoothed out over the next year or so. Or 2 or 3.
Yeah,
or
I mean, I certainly hope so too. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this as a CNCF person, but it continues to surprise me, given the human power and the resources behind projects like Kubernetes, that the developer story is still so lacking. And I'm not so sure that. I mean, who knows? Is Skaffold going to step in and be the thing that everybody uses? I mean, who knows? It's hard to predict, but I do think that it's filling that gap really well. I would describe it as it's something like Docker Compose, but for Kubernetes with all kinds of crazy auto refresh capabilities built in. So basically, with Skaffold, you can have all your Kubernetes YAML definitions. And you can actually watch them for changes. So you make a YAML change, and it'll update in Kubernetes. But
is it like a service that runs to watch this stuff?
Yeah,
in Kubernetes?
It's a service that runs. It's designed at least in dev mode to just run locally on your laptop in conjunction with Minikube. Yeah. So, but even better though is that it can actually interact with things like Docker files, Bazel builds, and a bunch of other stuff. So basically, you can say, this container is named this, and if you make changes to the underlying source code, it will rebuild your container, redeploy it on Kubernetes.
That sounds pretty awesome.
And it does it all locally. There are still a couple pain points for me. I think it's still really unwieldy to deal with things like config maps. So there's nothing like in Docker Compose when you just say, this local config file, just mount it as a volume in this container, and it all just works.
Oh, right.
And so you can just think of an entire repo as one big Docker Compose project, which I absolutely love.
Yeah.
So there's nothing like that just yet. You still have to handle your config maps and your config files as kind of a separate thing, but I have my fingers majorly crossed that the Skaffold folks are going to pull through on that.
That sounds like one of my favorite things that I use and used to use a lot, where in my IDE I would get it set up where if I save a file, it immediately runs tests again. Like it rebuilds whatever it is. It checks the binary, it does all this stuff, and I don't have to do anything. All I'm doing is I write the code, save. Maybe write a test, then save that. And it's always in a state of build green. Or if I've saved a bad file and I've broken something and it goes red and I get to trace into that immediately instead of fiddle around about it. And that sounds really cool from the infrastructure perspective, because heaven forbid you break something there, that takes hours to rebuild half the time or something. So that's pretty awesome. Now you get me excited about it. I'm going to look into it.
I do highly recommend it.
Very cool. So on these avenues of development that the CNCF is working on, is there any particular? And I'm trying to drill in and figure out which of the container techs are you most familiar with that you like to work with besides Docker? I mean, Docker's obviously container tech.
Sure. Well, with Kubernetes, I'm getting there. Of course, I've been working a lot on the documentation and a lot on the website and things like that. But in terms of stuff that I under the CNCF umbrella that I'm really interested in, or that I use on a regular basis. I mean,
or
recently,
do you just like the other projects? You don't really care about the underlying container tech.
Okay.
Because I mean, that's the thing of Kubernetes, right? It's not supposed to matter.
Right. It's not supposed to matter. Yeah. That's a great question. I mean, besides Skaffold, actually one CNCF project that is currently incubating that I'm excited about. It's not incubating, it's in the sandbox, which is a step prior to incubation. There's a project called Harbor, which is a container registry, an open source container registry, which would enable you to essentially have run your own Docker hub locally for usage, potentially in conjunction with Kubernetes, or you can just pull Docker images down directly, or so on and so forth. I think that's pretty interesting and compelling. Definitely takes a very important piece of the whole containery picture and brings it down to earth into open source land, which I think is great.
That is cool.
Yeah,
that was one of the things that always seemed like I would trip in the process of trying to do stuff with containers early on, was trying to figure out where to put them.
Yeah.
Because the minute you step in an enterprise, you say, all right, we're going to use this container stuff, and they're like, cool. What? You're getting them off of a public repo? No. And everything falls apart, because you have to have some type of internal repo system, server, service, whatever, to put those things in, or it's a no-go for a lot of enterprises. So that's pretty cool to know.
Yeah, and I can see how a lot of SRE, sysadmin, ops, security type people would be very skittish about, or have traditionally been very skittish about having Docker Hub as a dependency, pulling images over the open internet. A lot of issues there.
It goes the same with the libraries. It seems like I almost would bet, but I'm not going to, but I almost would bet that over the next couple of years, I feel like a resurgence of what can I bring to a local environment and do locally and not have to connect to do development and to have my environment built. Because there's been a lot of these major outages, whether it's libraries and like NPM or Go dependencies that do some crazy security mishap or whatever, or even just, we started to deploy a version of whatever to our distributed system, and then the thing we were pulling it from isn't available anymore, so we just upgraded half our system and half is not upgraded, so now we're in this weird pseudo-broken state. And it's like you need to bring, almost like it was done years ago, but you need to bring a copy of that software and then work from that locally, 100% locally, either to the local network or to the local machine, and do everything from there. I feel like there's a little bit of a resurgence around some of that stuff. And even with kubelets, what's the local kube thing now?
Minikube, or
is it still just called Minikube?
Or Minikube? I suppose.
Minikube, Minikub.
Who knows? Yeah.
Minikub. So like, I'm wondering about that in this space. Like, what is going to be done there to help build things locally? Because even with functions as a service or Lambda stuff, you still have to like run and test something locally. Have you seen anything or any impetus to move in that way as far as development is concerned with CNCF and Kubernetes and all that stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the local development story is still very much kind of a Wild West, where there's a broad assortment of tools that are filling in some of the gaps. I think Skaffold is the most noteworthy that I've personally seen thus far. But I think that I suppose this is probably kind of an overgeneralization, but within the Kubernetes ecosystem in general, I think that a lot of the effort really has been targeted more at the larger team kind of level, where something like container registries and CI/CD platforms that target Kubernetes and a lot of that stuff. I think that the picture is slowly emerging there, and I think that some really solid gains have been won in the last year or two. It's easy to forget that Kubernetes is like 4 years old. It's actually Kubernetes is just is you know a toddler amongst open source projects.
I was thinking that just as you said, well, just in the last 1 or 2 years, the huge gains that have been made, and my first thought is like, wait, since it was. That's about how old it is.
Yeah. I mean, that's about when I heard of it, 2016 or so. But I think that on the side of the lone wolf developer story, how far can you get on a laptop? How dangerous can you be with Kubernetes on a laptop? I think it's still pretty limited. I think that there's still a long ways to go there. I came upon this problem when I was trying to put together a demo for the meetup tonight. I'm doing a demo on Cassandra and Prometheus, which obviously
taunting the demo gods.
Yeah, and I just I'm going to come out and admit it. I couldn't get it to work on Kubernetes. I couldn't do it. And I write docs for Kubernetes. I've used it for a bunch of things. I've used it locally. I've used it in Google Cloud Platform. I've messed around with it a little bit on AWS. I can do meaningful things with Kubernetes, but when it came to basically running a Cassandra cluster, properly configuring it.
Yeah.
And also running
super tricky.
And running JMX exporters for Prometheus, like basically in the same pod as the Cassandra nodes, and then also running and configuring Prometheus, running and configuring Alert Manager, running and configuring Grafana dashboards to run in Kubernetes. It turned into such a horrific pile of spaghetti that I basically said I need to do something less ambitious and less demanding.
You did just become an entire IT department yourself.
Yeah, pretty much.
This stuff.
Yeah, pretty much. And I mean, perhaps one of the problems with Kubernetes is that it's so powerful that it
you bite off more than you chew.
Yeah, it induces you to think that you're capable of more than you actually are.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that really hammered home for me that wow, it still is really difficult to work with these things, and especially like I mentioned earlier with Skaffold, like things like configuration files, which when you're used to running things locally, you just you have your configuration file on disk somewhere, and you point to it with a command line flag, and it just works. And then in a Kubernetes environment, a lot of this stuff really just breaks down. A lot of these guarantees and a lot of this scaffolding, no pun intended, that we're used to in local environments just doesn't apply.
A lot of it is kind of ductwork scaffolding versus solid stuff still. So I mean, you have very big variances, and even with, like you were working with, Cassandra is not something that you just whimsically deploy out to Kubernetes. It is unto itself a complex distributed system. So you're talking about a complex distributed system running a complex distributed system.
Right.
So there's a lot of possible conflicts there, and then if you don't have the storage mapped right and something ephemeral goes away, Cassandra flips out trying to fix it, and Kubernetes starts to try to fix it, and it's downhill from there.
Yeah, and that turtles. Yeah, absolutely, and that really hammered home to me that when it comes to these complex distributed systems like Cassandra, but you could name many others. I mean, running Zookeeper, Kafka,
Zookeeper.
Pulsar, you name it. That the story there is still pretty rough, and honestly, one of the hubristic aspects of the live demo I was going to do is that I thought to myself, I shouldn't, I don't need to use an operator. I'm just gonna write my own YAML, I'm gonna write my own YAML configs, and of course that became an absolute mess. Which underscored to me that I mean, basically operators are quickly emerging as a very, very necessary thing.
Yes,
and that doing things any other way is pretty nutso still, I think.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one.
But even there, I mean, operators are a nice thing, but they're also not easy, and there still isn't a great story like, okay, I'm running Minikube on my laptop, and now I want to get this Cassandra. operator running and spin up a little cluster and so on and so forth. Like there's still a lot of, you're clicking around through docs and installing this and installing this, and I think that those are very necessary and unavoidable growing pains. But I'm of course very excited to see where things go. We have KubeCon Seattle coming up in December.
Yeah, what is it, December 10
Adron and I,
13 or something?
I think so. Yeah. Up here in lovely Seattle in the Emerald City.
We hope you're coming, because it's going to be a huge group of awesome people working on a lot of awesome projects.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm actually going to KubeCon in Shanghai next month as well. And
I'm
so,
envious now.
And of course, I'm going to go into these events with one thing in mind, and basically in every presentation and in every conversation I have. Everybody comes to a conference like that with their own kind of agenda. My agenda is 100% developer usability.
Very cool.
That's absolutely, and obviously I'm a developer advocate. So, but it's not just my job title that leads me to have this concern. Like I have this concern because I think that I have a developer-centric worldview when it comes to the entire tech sector. So
when I'm rooting for the team and for you and all that too, and I'll be there adding my input as I do sometimes and my various opinions, and I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm shocked that you'll be having
providing
opinions.
Yes. I have those sometimes. They just come forth. And on that note, thanks for talking to us.
Thanks for having me, Adron.
I'm the Hadron Collider.
Large Adron Collider. I'm Luc Perkins. Thank you for having me.
And this has been the Distributed Data Show.
Thank you for joining us again for the Distributed Data Show. We love your feedback, so go to the Distributed Data Show page on DataStax Academy and tell us what you think. You can also find us on the DataStax Academy YouTube channel, or find our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get great podcasts. While you're there, make sure and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.